Before we get into episode number 14 with the Athletic Scott Wheeler, which, by the way, is great. You are one of the top NHL draft analysts out there, and we really do appreciate you taking your time out of your day, Scott. So thank you so much for joining the show. But before we get into the episode, I wanted to wish every single person out there a happy Canada Day. We are so lucky to have the rights and freedoms that we have. We should not take them for granted. So happy Canada Day, and enjoy the episode.
Best of seven of this best of seven series.
Of a best of seven series.
Welcome to the Best of Seven podcast.
Welcome to the Best of Seven podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Plant from SENS. In episode number 14, we are joined here by the Athletic Scott Wheeler. Scott, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to join us. But before we get into the interview, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the sports news of the week. Firstly, new arena at Seattle Center. On Thursday, it was revealed that the naming rights to the refurbished Key Arena, where the National Hockey League team in Seattle will play home games, was purchased by Amazon owner Jeff Bezos. The new facility will be called Climate Pledge Arena and is billing itself as the first zero-carbon certified arena in the world. That's great news. And more great news, play ball. 2020 MLB season is a go, with a July 23rd, 24th start date for a 60-game schedule. I'm surprised that they really worked it out, but it's great news for baseball fans and the league itself. Baseball will play this year. Cam Newton yesterday signed a one-year contract with the New England Patriots. That shocked a lot of people. The 2015 MVP signed a one-year contract with the six-time Super Bowl champions. Newton, at the age of 31, will compete with the rookie Jarrett Stidham for the starting role. That will be interesting to see if Stidham will beat out Newton or if Cam Newton will take the starting role reins in New England. And keeping on with New England, the Patriots were fined $1.1 million and as well lost a 2021 third-round draft pick. That comes after they were caught spying on the Cleveland Browns and the Cincinnati Bengals in the 2020 season. So they're not allowed. Their TV crews are not allowed to film the field or anything. And a little harsh, but it is what it is. And the Patriots and Bill Belichick, I'm sure, will find a way to get through that. Last note, Vince Carter, legend here in Canada, retired at the age after a 22-year career, pardon me. So congratulations to Vince Carter on a fantastic career. Now, Scott, as an Ottawa native and as clearly an Ottawa Senators fan, let's talk about the recent Hall of Fame inductees announced earlier this week. As Sens fans, we all want to hear your opinion on why Daniel Alfredsson has been passed 4 times to not being into the Hall. What went through your head when you saw he wasn't going to the Hall this year?
Sens fans aren't going to like this, but I wasn't terribly surprised, honestly. I think he had a tough case this year. I think it's going to take a year where there either aren't or the people who are sort of first year eligible have weak cases for him to sort of climb in and finally be inducted, if you will. I think that's largely, well, first of all, I think there's a few reasons. I think the big one for me is that in terms of the body of his work, in terms of this sort of accolades, if you will, he was never really a contender for the Art Ross. He was never really a contender for league MVP. He was never really one of those sort of dominant Selke players, though he was certainly a gifted two-way player. And then ultimately he never had the Stanley Cup. And I think in terms of how the voting process works, those things tend to work against him. So I wasn't terribly surprised. I was more surprised that Kevin Lowe was the 4th player inducted in that class. I think that the other 3 male forwards out of the 4 players inducted in the male player category were kind of to be expected. I think Doug Wilson absolutely should be in the Hall of Fame. Jerome McGinley and Marian Hossa should absolutely be in the Hall of Fame. So I was always going to be curious more about who that 4th player was going to be. I would probably argue that Alex McGillney and Sergei Gonchar have slightly stronger cases than Daniel Alfredsson. But for me, Alfredsson's kind of in that next tier. He probably would have been it's not a ranked ballot and they only get to choose up to 4 players. But if it's a ranked ballot and I'm sitting there, he's probably 6th or 7th on my list this year. Which isn't to say that Alfredsson's never going to be in the Hall of Fame or that he shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. I just think he's always going to be one of those down ballot players, and that's not going to change moving forward. I mean, next year he's going to have to contend with Jaromir Jagr as a first-year eligible player. Yeah, so it's going to be. I think it's going to still be a bit of a wait for Alfredsson. I think he'll be one of those players who gets in eventually, a lot like Sergei Gonchar and Alex McGillney will be, but. No, I don't think I was terribly surprised by the outcome, honestly.
Well, I look at the stats here, and I look at the award accolades. Won a Calder in 96, Clancy in 2011, the Messier Award in 2013. On top of that, a 9.3 point per game, which was actually better than Jerome McGinley. 1 gold medal, the same as Jerome McGinley. He also got him sitting 54th all-time in points. Listen, I understand he can't be ahead of McGillney and a couple other guys, but he is a Hall of Famer. And I think the fact that the Senators organization isn't helping his case, such as like Toronto with Matt Sundin, whenever that happens, that has an effect. Because if you don't have anyone really pushing for you, you're not going to get the votes you need. Now, the next question, what is your opinion on Kevin Lowe? We just kind of discussed that. Kevin Lowe is sort of a controversial pick to the Hall of Fame. Defender with 432 points in an era where there's goals left, right, and center. What do you think about that one?
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about Kevin Lowe. He undoubtedly had a tremendous career. He was one of the best defensemen on one of the greatest teams in NHL history for the better part of a decade, really. Even after Wayne Gretzky left, he was still a big part of those teams. He was still a dominant defensive defenseman. He was a regular all-star. He certainly deserves to be in the conversation. I think my problem with Kevin Lowe getting in is that it's a lot like what happened last year with Guy Carbonneau, where now suddenly we're moving the goalposts a little bit and we're adjusting our expectations and trying to include more players who have defensive ability. And I think in doing so, you're going to water down some of the players that get in. You're going to minimize some of the effect that the Hall of Fame has in terms of how prestigious it really is. So certainly he was a great player on a great team, surrounded by a ton of talent, and that's a part of his story. But at the same time, I think when you look at the impact that Alex McGillney had, or that Sergei Gonchar had as the highest scoring Russian defenseman in NHL history, or that Daniel Alfredsson had in Ottawa, I think they have stronger cases for this sort of down ballot induction.
And I agree. And I was on a podcast the other day, and I mentioned that if you're a Hall of Famer, the credential, in my opinion, to be a Hall of Famer is every single time you step on the ice, you make an impact and you change the outcome of the game. That's what a Hall of Famer is to me. You just dominate every single time you touch the ice. That's what a Hall of Famer is for me. Now, there's a very old argument about the importance of winning a Stanley Cup, that it gives you a better case to get into the Hall of Fame. What matters more to you when it comes to players being inducted to the Hall? Statistical performance, individual rewards, or Stanley Cups? What's your, what do you think?
Statistical performance has to be the sort of rock bed, the anchor of it all. You should always be coming back to that. The other things are bonuses. Team success is a bonus, sure. But there are tremendous, tremendous players who never won Stanley Cups or never won an Art Ross. And that, yeah, exactly. And I'm not sure that should be sort of prohibiting in terms of your ability to get into the Hall. So it's definitely something that I think a lot about. And we did a similar project at The Athletic where we chose our own through Eric Duhacek, our sort of former member of, if you will, for 15 years. Eric was a member of the Hockey Hall of Fame selection committee. He walked us through how the process actually works, and we went about selecting our own class. And I always tried to come back to a player's production and a player's peak performance. If you were not one of the best players at your position in the NHL at one point in your career, then I don't think you should have a case. And for someone like McGillney, he was. In McGillney's prime, he was arguably the greatest goal scorer in the world. And you just cannot make that case about many of the other players like a Theo Fleury or a Keith Tkachuk or a Vincent LeCavalier, players who were great players in their own right, but never got to that sort of next tier, that next level. So that's where I'm at on the sort of Hockey Hall of Fame inductions and how things played out, I think.
Well, with the Hockey Hall of Fame, we can go back and forth and debate, but at the end of the day, like you said, we're moving the goalposts. There's really no certain credentials for how to make the selection. So let's move on to the NHL Draft Lottery, which was on this Friday. And a lot of fan bases, including myself, were angered when a playing team won the first round pick. What was your reaction when you saw that?
I thought it was fun. I thought it was a ton of fun. It was an electric night. Social media was buzzing.
Yes.
It was everything that I think it's supposed to be. This is ultimately, at the end of the day, meant to be entertaining. And we get caught up in the nuance of it and in the sort of our eagerness to complain about things as it relates to the way that the NHL handles these kinds of events. But the odds of what happening were slim. And I don't think you have to fault the sort of process for the outcome. The focus should always be on what the process is about. And I think the NHL has done a decent job with the lottery in terms of balancing out the odds, making sure that teams that are tanking aren't openly tanking because they know that they're going to be guaranteed anything. We had a few years ago where teams were cheering when the Buffalo Sabres were losing games, and that stuff just can't happen. And I think the way that you accomplish that is through a flattened, sort of relatively balanced lottery scheme for teams 1 through 15. And that's what the NHL has created. Your odds of losing are greater than your odds of winning, and there's always going to be surprises. And I have no problem with it. I don't think it should really matter who the teams are as long as the process is sound. And I think the NHL has put together a decent process in terms of deciding on the first overall pick.
Well, I think firstly, the biggest issue about this whole format is that these play-in teams, which essentially the play-in is a playoff. It's not, but it is, because the games are reffed with playoff rules. In my opinion, it's playoff games. But on top of that, the fact that these 8 teams that lose the play-in round have a higher chance than the Detroit Red Wings, who just suffered through one of the worst seasons in NHL history, which I agree. You shouldn't openly tank. However, 24.5% chance those 8 teams get in to get that first overall pick, and then 18.5% for the Detroit Red Wings. Doesn't seem to be fair to me. And on top of that, in a regular season where, let's say, Chicago moved up and they just missed the playoffs, they're 15th, and then they get the first overall, sucks, but that's the way the lottery works, and I respect that. But this is a different year, and there needs to be that needs to be adjusted, because Detroit's not going to be playing for the next 5-6 months. Ottawa's not going to be playing for the 5-6 next months. So at the same time, I agree, the lottery is important because we don't want fans cheering against their team. But at the same time, in a year as wonky as this, giving the teams that are essentially playing games and getting their players reps and everything a higher chance than a team that just suffered for months. And I'm not even a Red Wings fan, but for months suffering doesn't seem to make sense for me. But with Ottawa, 3rd and 5, I'm happy with 3rd and 5. I can't complain. And speaking of 3rd and 5, we have both of those picks and the New York Islanders pick. If you're Pierre Dorion, what do you do with all 3 selections?
I think you probably target 2 forwards with the first 2 selections. It will depend on where that third selection is. But my tendency with, and I've said this on several shows already in Ottawa, my tendency with that pick would probably be to lean forward. For me, this draft has a clear-cut top 8 prospects. 7 of those prospects are forwards. And I just think that with what they've assembled in their prospect pool in terms of Eric Brandstrom, Lassie Thompson, Jacob Bernard-Docker, plus Thomas Chabot already established at the NHL level, you've got 4 very strong pieces on your blue line moving forward. And even if Lassie Thompson or Jacob Bernard-Docker don't make it, or they become more depth pieces than prominent role players, you still probably end up with 3 out of 4 of those guys panning out, and 3 out of 4 of those guys becoming NHL regulars. And when I look at the Ottawa Senators up front, certainly they've got some nice pieces there. Josh Norris, Alex Formenton, Shane Pinto, plus the established players like Colin White, and Logan Brown's not far off, and Brady Tkachuk, et cetera. But when I look at them up front, they're missing that true sort of defining player. Brady Tkachuk's a great player. Drake Batherson's going to be a great player. But neither of those players are number 1 or number 2 players on a championship team. They just aren't talented enough. So what you can target at number 3 and number 5, I think, and I would argue, are 2 better players than who Brady Tkachuk was at the same age. I think both of those prospects, whether it's Cole Perfetti or Lucas Raymond or Alexander Holtz or Marco Rossi or Tim Stützle, you're going to end up with 2 prospects who immediately become the number 1 prospects in your organization and who are immediately potential first-line forwards for you within a couple of years. So that's where I'm at on those first 2 picks. The third pick is, there's too much up in the air, I think, right now for me to properly comment on it. I would be tempted. I mean, certainly if Yaroslav Askarov is available, that's a no-brainer. But I would be tempted otherwise probably to go forward again. I just don't think that this draft is strong enough on defense to merit taking a player in that teens range. If you do, you're probably reaching on a defender like a Braden Schneider or a Caden Gooley, who are big and long and are mobile and can make the odd play, but aren't really going to be top of the lineup defensemen for me, at least. So again, I think there will be forwards in that range that are that. And then Askarov is a no-brainer. If they walk away with 2 of my top 8 forwards at 3 and 5, and then Askarov in the teens, I think that's a home run for Ottawa.
Can't disagree. And on top of the defensive rankings you already said, we always forget about Christian Melanin, who already has NHL experience, and the kid actually looks pretty good, like a top 4 guy. So like you said, there's really no need to add on to that defense. Lassie Thompson should work out. He's going to be playing in a men's league next year. JBD is going to get great experience in college. And of course, you got Brandstrom, who had an up and down year, but he's a young prospect. He's going to be okay. And you got Shabbat. The Senators defense should be all right. And worst case, you can trade a couple of second rounders to get a depth or defenseman in to fill the gap while people develop. I agree. This draft is so deep on offensive players. You got Lucas Raymond, you got Tim Stützle, you got Byfield, Rossi, the Ottawa 67th player. There are so many talented players, and it's one of the first drafts in a long time where the top 10, after the first overall pick, there's no top 5. It's so all over the place, and that's exciting as a fan because that tells you how deep this draft is. Now, since the Senators have the 3rd overall pick, there's a debate throughout the fan base about who is better, Quinton Byfield or Tim Stützle. Who do you think goes to LA at number 2? And I must mention, in your athletic prospect rankings, you mentioned that Tim Stützle in your rankings is number 7. So I also wanted you to touch up on that as well.
Yeah, I think Quinton will more than likely go to LA. The only ripple effect that LA has created as being the team that won 2nd overall is that they are deeper at center than any other team in the NHL in their prospect pool. They've got 7 or 8 quality prospects who would be sort of top 5 prospects in another organization, and they all play center. So what the tendency for them, or the sort of allure for them, if you will, may be to take a player like Tim, because Tim can play, has more experience playing the wing. Quinton has played the wing a little bit, including at the World Juniors this year, but Quinton's going to be a center in the NHL, whereas Tim could well be a left winger. And I think that could create a little bit of an internal debate in LA, but by and large, I still think they probably end up with Quinton, and I think Quinton is the better player and the better prospect and the better pick for them. As for Tim, I mean, Stützle he's a wonderful player. He's an electric skater. He's the best skater in the draft. He's going to be a dynamic player off the rush at the NHL level. He's going to be able to create in transition. All of those things are true. My concern with Tim relative to some of the other forwards that I have at the top of my board is that he doesn't have the same well-roundedness to his game. A player like Marco Rossi is a brilliant two-way player. A player like Lucas Raymond has developed some nice defensive qualities in terms of the way that he hunts the puck. I think Tim can get a little bit lost when he doesn't have the puck and when he's not playing in transition. And he's certainly got creativity in the offensive zone, and he's an excellent playmaker who's going to be able to play or potentially even run an NHL power play. But he's not the same goal scorer that a Cole Perfetti is, or an Alexander Holtz is, and he's not the same kind of playmaker or defensive presence that, say, a Lucas Raymond or a Marco Rossi is. So that ultimately gave them the slight edge. That doesn't mean that I'm super confident that Tim Stützle is the 7th best prospect in the class, because it's not that cut and dry. I think all of those kids from 3 to 8 for me are really tightly grouped, and I could easily understand a case for Tim Stützle as the 3rd overall pick. But I just slightly preferred a couple of the qualities that some of those other players have, like a Cole Perfetti or a Marco Rossi or a Lucas Raymond.
Well, let's just assume that the draft begins the way we assume it will be, with Lafreniere going 1st and Byfield going 2nd. If you're Pierre Dorion, who are you selecting 3rd overall?
I would probably, honestly, this will surprise some people, because I think the consensus pick there is Tim, and the obvious choice there will probably be Tim for the Senators. I think they'll go Stützle at 3rd overall, and then sort of adjust their expectations from there, and maybe get a player like Cole Perfetti or Lucas Raymond at 5th overall.
Lucas Raymond would be 5th, yeah.
Yeah. But I would probably be tempted to take Cole Perfetti or Marco Rossi there. I do think Cole Perfetti and Marco Rossi give you a little bit something a little more. Certainly Marco's a center. I'm not fully convinced at least, that Tim is going to be a center at the next level. And what the Senators need more than anything is a center rather than a winger. So I think Marco just fills a need that Tim may not be able to fill. And then as for Cole goes, Cole's that sort of impact goal scorer. He's that player who can crack open a game in a shift, in a split second. And Tim certainly has that kind of quality to him as well. Stützle's ability to turn defenders and create breakaways and knife to the front of the net is truly elite. But Cole's ability to anticipate where the play is going, get the puck to his line mates, and then make that same kind of play that Stützle makes in terms of getting to the front of the net with puck skill is all still there. So I don't know. It's tough for me. I could understand Stützle at third overall, but I think at this point, I would probably lean Cole Perfetti or Marco Rossi.
Well, I'm hoping that Stützle is taking third. I'm hoping Perfetti's taking fourth, and I'm hoping Ottawa gets fifth and gets Marco Rossi. I think if Ottawa can leave this draft with Tim Stützle, who would be the number one center, not number one center, pardon me, the top line winger that the Senators actually need. Because Drake Batherson, top six, I don't know if he's the top winger, though. I don't know if he's the top winger on your team. Tim Stützle could be that. And Marco Rossi, I think he could be the number one center for the team. He's a workhorse. He dominated in Ottawa this year, and like you said, his two-way game is fantastic. So, I think Ottawa really can't go wrong unless they draft way off the board in the top five. Really, any pick. This is the first draft in a while that I won't be disappointed because all the talent available, you can't go wrong. But speaking of the talent, probably one of the best goaltenders in draft history, one of the most hyped up goaltenders in draft history is Yaroslav Askarov. Now, where is he going to be drafted? Are there specific teams that you think would draft Askarov higher? And will we see him play in the National Hockey League next year?
I think New Jersey makes a lot of sense in terms of the teams that are most likely. I would have said if LA had dropped that they might have considered it, probably a bit more of a long shot. But New Jersey just makes sense because, like the Senators, I mean, Ottawa makes sense too, but New Jersey, like the Senators, has 2 picks in that top 15 range. So if they take a forward at 7th overall, and then let's say they're drafting 13th or 14th overall with their next pick, it would be hard for them, even with the emergence of Mackenzie Blackwood for the Devils, to not take that swing on Askarov, I think. I don't know. He's kind of the complete wild card of that sort of top 15 range. I do think he's going to go in the front half of the first round. Probably. I'm not sure to where he's going to go in the front half of the first round, but I think it will play out a lot like it did for Spencer Knight last year, where he ends up in that sort of 10 to 15 range.
Well, I think
to answer your question on whether he's going to play in the NHL next year, the answer is no. He's signed in the KHL for next year.
Okay, then there's your answer. But I think you look at a team like the LA Kings, it's unfortunate they have the 2nd overall pick in this circumstance because Askarov would be perfect for the Kings. Quick is young. Pettersson, we don't know too much about him. So they really need the goalie of the future as they rebuild that team. So Askarov, like you said, would have been perfect for the Kings. And maybe, who knows, they'll make a trade to get him or move up to get him. We'll see. But now let's take a look at the draft in general. Who do you think will be the biggest steal of this draft?
I think there are a couple of players who could end up being huge steals. I think if someone like an Alexander Holtz slips, which I think is possible, if players like Jake Sanderson and Yaroslav Askarov slide up, then one of those forwards is inevitably going to slip because Jamie Drysdale is not going to slip. So I think whichever of those forwards slips into 10, 11, 12 range will be a huge steal, just like players like Cole Perfetti or players like Cole Caulfield and Alex Newhook and Peyton Krebs were a year ago, and even Matthew Boldy to a certain degree. So that's what I would keep an eye on at the top of the draft. A little bit deeper in the draft, I think you have the potential for a player like a Jan Mysak or a Noel Gunler to have the same kind of outcomes in their post-draft season that Arthur Kaliev did. I believed last year heading into the draft that Arthur Kaliev was the 13th best prospect in the draft. And when he went 33rd overall to the LA Kings, I was pretty surprised that he had fallen that far, even knowing that he is a liability defensively and he cheats up ice and he's got some warts to his game and his skating and that kind of a thing. And I think the same kind of conversation has developed this year with Jan Mysak and with Noel Gunler, who are both, in my opinion, sort of the top of that next tier after those 8 players that I talked about, with a Jake Sanderson, with a Yaroslav Askarov. I think they're in that sort of next group of 5 or 6 players, but they're not going to go in that next group of 5 or 6 players. I think you're more likely to see players like Dylan Holloway and Dawson Mercer and Seth Jarvis go in that range. And as a result, plus a number of those defensemen like a Caden Gooley and a Braden Schneider. And as a result, I think you'll see Noel Gunler and Jan Mysak go in this sort of late first round, early second round. And I think that could be huge value because I think they both have the skill sets that if all goes well for them and they continue to develop and they spend a couple more years sort of honing their craft, that they could be an impact player at the NHL level. And anytime you can get that in the late first round or early second round is a huge boost for an organization.
Also, speaking of Jarvis, I think Ottawa might target him with the 3rd pick. It depends what they do with the top 2. But I love Jarvis. I think he's not spoken about enough because if it was any other draft, I think he'd be talked about in the top 10. Speaking of the top 10, though, we're going to look at Jack Quinn. 52 goals last year, and he didn't even play with Marco Rossi. What do you think about Jack Quinn, and who takes him, and what's he going to do in the National Hockey League?
Quinn's been fun to get to know and get to evaluate this year because he came out of nowhere. He was certainly an important piece of a dominant, a truly sensational Ottawa 67s team 2 years ago. But he played further down that lineup, a lot like players like Graham Clark did. They were so stacked up front 2 years ago that players like Quinn didn't get to shine in his draft -2 year. So to watch him come out this year and really take hold of it and grab a more prominent role in the lineup and have the kind of success that he did was a lot of fun to watch. He was also a player who never grew up playing AAA hockey. He played AA hockey growing up. He wasn't a top prospect into the OHL draft. So he's not one of those kids at the top of this draft. I mean, most of the players at the top of this draft I've been watching for years, and Jack has never really been that much of a focus until about the last 12, 18 months. And so that was really nice to just to see him have a huge year. He's a wonderful kid. He's just one of those kids who's got it all going for him. He's articulate, he's smart, he works hard, and he's going to get better too. He's one of those kids who can still get stronger. He's 6'1", but when you meet him and when you speak with him, he's not a terribly big or strong-looking kid. He's not built. He doesn't have those broad shoulders that you see in a lot of these kids, or the lower half that you see in a player like Marco Rossi. So he's still got this sort of wiry look to him. And I think as he gets bigger and stronger, his ability to get to the slot and to shoot the puck is only going to improve. So he's an exciting player. He's an older player in this draft, so you have to consider that he's basically a year older than players like Quinton Byfield. And he probably has less growing to do in terms of his skill set that way. But I think because he was such a late bloomer that we're just seeing the beginning of him. And I don't sort of typically see him as that sort of older player who's got less growth to do because of that. So he's a legitimate sort of top 15, top 20 prospect in this draft.
And a fun fact, our chief editor, Noah Luden, actually went to school with Jack Quinn when he was in Ottawa, as an Ottawa 67. So that's a little fun fact. Now let's talk about Buffalo. A little bit of dysfunctionalness there in Buffalo. Buffalo is a team that has the longest playoff drought, now at 9 years, but they're drafting 8th overall. Do you expect them to trade up in the draft to take an elite prospect to help form a better core there?
I wouldn't. I would stick put. You're still going to get one of those prospects at 8th overall. I think Jake Sanderson could go in that top 7. And if that happens, you could not only have one prospect who's available, but you could have 2 prospects in my sort of top 8 range who are available. And they could get a Lucas Raymond or an Alexander Holtz or a Marco Rossi at that 8 spot. So, I would stay put and just take the best player and move on and add that piece to Dylan Cousins and Jack Eichel and the rest of their young core that they're trying to assemble there.
Well, let's talk about another team that's sort of going through a little bit of a phase here. The Detroit Red Wings, let's get back to them. They fell to 4th. They finished the season with the worst record in the NHL. They went 17-49-5, 39 points, but they fell to 4th overall. What do you expect Detroit to do with their selection? Is there a specific prospect at number 4 that would be a perfect fit for the organization?
I don't know. It seemed like they were destined or sort of had their heart set, if you will, on certainly Alexis Lafreniere. That was their goal. But if not Alexis, then it seemed out of Detroit, like they were sort of had their heart set on taking Tim Stützle, whether they were 2nd or 3rd overall. Now, with the way things are playing out, they're unlikely to get him at 4th overall. And I think as a result, they're probably sort of doing some rejigging of their board. They're going to have to do more legwork on a couple of the kids that are in that range. And I'm not sure which way they're going to go with it, quite frankly. Dylan Larkin is a number 1 center for sure. I'm not sure he's a number 1 center on a championship team. And then Moritz Seider is a potential number 1 defenseman for sure, but I'm not sure he's a number 1 defenseman on a contending team. So it's not like what they do have is enough. I would say that between Philip Zadina and Joe Veleno and Moritz Seider and Antti Tuomisto, that they have some nice pieces there. But this is going to be a big pick for them, and they have to make sure that it's a home run and a big hit for them. And if they swing and miss, it's going to set them back even further. So I don't know. I don't honestly know which direction they'll go. I would probably guess that they're not going to take a defenseman just because they did take Seider and Tuomisto last year, and those are both 2 of the 20 or 30 best D prospects in the world right now. So they probably lean forward I don't know who they'll take, though, and I don't have a great inkling on which direction they're going to go. I think someone like Lucas Raymond would make a lot of sense for them, just as a true potential game breaker and the kind of player that you can swing and miss on. But if you handle his development right, could be a true star. So Raymond comes to mind, but I don't know. I think Cole Perfetti would make some sense for them. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said, the organization has just begun the rebuild. So like you said, in such an important draft in a year where they really, really, really bottomed out, they really need to hit a home run here. Now let's move on to the newest National Hockey League franchise, the Seattle NHL team. The debate has started of what the National Hockey League team Seattle's name should be called. Names such as the Kraken, the Sockeyes have been thrown as possible ideas. Do you have a preference on the Seattle team's name, or do you even know or have some sort of rumor for what the name will be called for the Seattle NHL team?
No, I don't have any sort of firsthand knowledge in terms of which direction they're leaning. I know Kraken has been talked about more than Sockeye, so I wouldn't be surprised if they went that direction. I also just think in terms of the fun of it all, that a sort of octopus monster is a little bit cooler as a logo, if you will, than fish. So we'll see. I don't know. There's a lot of things that they can do with it. We know that what their color scheme is going to be. It's going to be some combination of navy, teal, and sort of red accents. So they're going to stick with the Seattle branding in terms of the colors that they go. But I have no knowledge of which direction they're going with the logo or with the team name. I think Kraken would be a lot of fun, though.
I agree, and it's too bad they're not going with the green colors like the Seattle Seahawks or anything. It would have been very unique for the National Hockey League. There's a lot of teams that use red, like Ottawa, New Jersey. You can go down the list, Chicago. There's a lot of teams that wear red, and I think it would have been cool to see sort of a neonish green. But who knows? Maybe that'll still happen. But like you said, it's very unlikely, and they sort of already announced that. So
I think it's worth saying that red isn't going to be their primary color either.
Oh, okay.
Like you'll see red show up on some of the trim. Their primary color is probably going to be like a teal/navy blue.
Okay.
Like
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's unique. As long as it's unique and fun, I like that. Because like Vegas, for example, with their jerseys with the gray and the gold and the white, they're beautiful and they're unique. And that's what I like with jerseys. I don't like it when they all look the same. Now, you've been around many different writing and reporting organizations. You've written for the Toronto Star, the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Sun, the National Post, and many more. Now you write for The Athletic. Where did your hockey journey start? Was there one moment that made you a fan for life?
It started like everyone else's does. I grew up in a hockey family. My dad grew up playing the sport. I'm the youngest of three boys. Both of my older brothers grew up in the sport. So I was always the kid who was dragged to their sort of rep hockey tournaments and eating at the snack bar and just enjoying being at the rink. I actually didn't, it's a little bit of a funny story, but I actually didn't as a kid enjoy playing hockey. I
Really?
used to cry when I was put on skates and I hated skating and et cetera, et cetera. So I actually started playing a couple of years later than most kids. Most kids start at 5 now, and I started at 6. I was about to turn 7. But I've obviously been playing ever since, grew up playing. I still play beer league twice a week to this day. So that's where it all kind of started for me, was just through family and through the love of the sport. And there's been no turning back since then, I guess.
Well, you're very well known for your hockey writing, but are you a fan of other sports? You did write for the PGA Tour, so maybe that's an example.
Yeah, no question. I'm a diehard sports guy across the board. The only sport that I've never really been able to get into is probably the NFL.
Really?
For one reason or another, it's the only sport that I'm not particularly passionate about. But yeah, I wrote for 2 years for PGAtour.com. I covered PGA Tour events across North America with them, did some PR and media relations work for them as well. So golf is a big thing in my life. My wife and I are huge tennis fans. I'm a big Raptors guy. I covered the Raptors when I was actually at the Toronto Sun. I covered the Raptors playoff run of 2016, I believe. It might have been 2017. So I covered the Raptors for 20 some odd playoff games. I covered the Blue Jays when I was with the Toronto Sun, so I'm a huge baseball guy. It's pretty much every major North American sport other than football. I'm pretty much all in on. My in-laws are from England. My wife's family is from England, so they're big soccer and F1 people. And I wouldn't say I've ever been as passionate about soccer or F1. but it's grown on me in a big way since I've been with my wife now. So yeah, other than football, I'm watching everything these days.
I wanted to ask about the hat because I know that's the Newfoundland Growlers ECHL logo. Love the logo. I'm just going to ask quickly, where did you get the hat? Did you go to Newfoundland?
Yeah, I did a big feature on the Newfoundland Growlers. I actually went and embedded with the team for their first week of their existence as they came back. So I flew into St. John's and spent about 9 days in St. John's, just getting to know the players, getting to know the market, getting to know the city and what they mean to the province, and brought back some merchandise. Of course, it's probably my favorite logo. If I'm being honest, It's probably my favorite logo in professional sports. So I've been keeping close eyes through my work, obviously, on the Newfoundland Growlers ever since I went out there. But it's just an absolutely magical place and one of the sort of great cities. St. John's is one of the great cities in Canada, and looking forward to hopefully going back someday for sure.
Best part about that story is in their inaugural season, they won the championship. So maybe you had a little bit of good luck for them. I don't know, but good for them. That's awesome. Now, another a controversial topic, like we already touched on in the NHL, is the new 2014 playoff format that gives teams like Chicago and Montreal a chance to play for a Stanley Cup, while as well having a shot at first overall if they lose the play-in round. Do you like the new format, and is there anything you'd change about it?
It's a good question. I don't hate the new format. I don't think it's ideal. I don't think that teams like the Arizona Coyotes and the Montreal Canadiens and the Chicago Blackhawks should be performing or a part of any kind of potential playoff series. I think the NBA did a better job, even if it wasn't balanced from the number of teams per conference, to just say the teams that actually had a chance at making the playoffs are the only teams we're going to allow to participate in that process. Whether it means that we've got 9 teams in one conference and 15 teams in another, it's irrelevant. So I think the NHL, in its constant push to A, get big markets involved in this process for the TV ratings, and B, make sure that everything is as balanced as possible, because that's how they like to run their league, has lost the plot a little bit on this process. I think you could have had a fewer number of teams. You could have had smaller bubbles. And I think you still would have had a tremendous sort of playoff experience and the kind of thing that we expect out of the Stanley Cup playoffs, which are a truly great playoff format. So yeah, I think it's a little bit disappointing. I don't think it's a complete failure. Certainly now we're going to have bigger TV ratings, which is objectively good for the sport. But I really don't think that teams like Montreal and Arizona and Chicago, those 3 teams in particular, they stood a near zero chance of making the playoffs when the season got paused, and everything else seems like it's a little bit inefficient as a result. So we'll see. It's going to be fun. I don't think either of those 3 teams are going to win their play-in rounds anyways, so maybe it's a bit of a moot point. But I don't think they should be participating to begin with.
Well, I just feel bad for Buffalo. They got the 8th overall pick, and they also got screwed over. They're not in this. They had 2 games in hand, and they were like a point or 2 back of Montreal. Realistically,
and they were about to play Montreal.
Yes, so realistically, Buffalo should be in this, and Montreal should be out of this. And I just had to touch up on that because the NHL Stanley Cup playoffs, not watched enough by people in America, but it's probably the best playoff. And I know I'm biased for saying that, but just the excitement, that in the MLB playoffs, there's nothing like the two. That's the excitement, the raw passion and emotion that comes out of the playoffs in both respective sports. I think they're just incredible. The fortunate part about the NBA, besides the last couple of years, it's been so predictable with Cleveland, with LeBron James, and of course Stephen Curry and Golden State. But now I could watch the playoffs again. Well, last year I did with the Raptors, but with the NBA now, there's at least – you don't know who's going to win. There's a few different options. So with the NHL, I'm a little upset that they sort of ruined or screwed over a couple of teams, and on top of that, sort of ruined one of the best playoffs in all sports. But once again, we've been without sports for 4 or 5 months, and if it's safe, I'd love to get sports back. And, if this is the way it is, it's the way it is. I just want to see hockey on the TV. Now, of the 8 series we have in the play-in round, which series are you looking forward to watching the most?
It's a good question. It's a really good question. I think Minnesota and Vancouver will be really good, just because I think that's one of the series that's absolutely a 50-50 split. I could see it going either direction. And I think if Vancouver gets through, in particular, I think Vancouver's the better team, but if Vancouver gets through, just getting to watch Elias Pettersson do his thing for a Stanley Cup playoff round and for a 7-game series after the 5-game series, I think would be a lot of fun. I think that team with Quinn Hughes and Deaky Pete are about as fun to watch as any team in the NHL these days. So I'm kind of hoping that Vancouver sort of topples Minnesota there, because I think that creates a more interesting Western Conference playoff bracket.
Well, I'm looking at 2 series. I'm looking at New York Islanders and the Florida Panthers. I'm interested to see if Bobrovsky after the break can really improve those numbers. He had a really up and down first year after a big contract with the Florida Panthers. I'm also interested to see Barry Trotz versus Joel Quenneville, a coaching battle. That should be fun. And another one would be the Rangers and Carolina. I think that's one of the series where I think there'll be an upset. I think the Rangers they just got it. The defense is okay, but the offense is really good. The goaltending is better. In Carolina, they really need to prove that last year was not just a blip, because this year they've sort of been up and down. So that's another series to watch for sure, and I really expect the Rangers to pull through in that one. Now, speaking of an upset with the Rangers being in Carolina, is there really any chance that teams like Montreal, Chicago, or really any team like the Rangers, for example, pull off an upset in the play-in round?
Yeah, I think in those tighter series, in the sort of Minnesota, Vancouver, Columbus, Toronto, I think Columbus could beat Toronto. I think there are a couple of matchups that come to mind, but I don't think the sort of those bottom tier teams that I talked about are going to pull off an upset. There's been a lot of talk about, should we be afraid of Carey Price or Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane? And at the end of the day, I think Pittsburgh is going to handle Montreal pretty quickly.
Probably, especially now.
So I wouldn't expect, any major upsets, but I do think you could see teams like Columbus, that the Florida New York series could go either way. There are a couple of series that could risk a little bit of an upset, I think.
Yeah, and I agree. And, I don't understand. Carey Price this year was okay, but he's not the same Carey Price of a few years ago. And the team in front of him is not the same team it was a few years ago. So if you're playing a team like Pittsburgh with Crosby, Malkin, Letang, etc., all these star players, Montreal, Max Domi will probably sit out. And after that, who they really got? There's not really that much talent to mask the talent that Pittsburgh has, especially in a play-in series. So I don't see that happening. But Chicago, Edmonton, I love to see Toews versus McDavid and Draisaitl versus Kane. That will be fun to watch. Now, overall, we look at the plan, we look at the Cup Finals, everything. We look at the Stanley Cup playoffs. What is your Stanley Cup Finals prediction, and who wins it all?
Oh, the $1 million question. I would probably lean Boston in the East. Mm-hmm. The only challenge for Boston is that they're going to have a tougher road. They may have to get past both Tampa and the Leafs in the first 2 rounds, and I think those are going to be competitive series, even for a team that's as dominant as Boston is. But I think Boston, fully healthy and fully rested, will be at an advantage versus some of those other teams, just because a team like the Leafs and the Lightning are built primarily around young core pieces. And Boston, I think, needed this rest more than the others just to recharge for some of those veterans. And I think that will make a big difference for a Boston team that was already the clear-cut best team in the league this year. And then out west, I really like Vegas, but I tend to lean Colorado because, again, they're going to be fully healthy. I think Colorado, when they're sort of firing on all cylinders, and when Mikko Rantanen is healthy, those things move the needle in a big way. And don't get me wrong, I'm a huge fan of the way that Vegas Golden Knights play, and I think they could be a contender out there more so than teams like Dallas are. But yeah, it'll probably be, I think it'll be Vegas or Colorado out west, and then Boston in the East. And I think Boston is ultimately, if they can stay healthy, the best team in the league.
Well, I'm glad you touched up on Colorado, because they were firing on all cylinders, and they were winning games without Mikko Rantanen, without Gabriel Landeskog, even without McKinnon for a bit. That team is electric. It's so fast. They're so fast, and they're fun to watch. So I'd love to see them, and I agree. I think they come out of the West. The East, I can see Boston. I think a team that not enough people are speaking about, Carter Hart and the Philadelphia Flyers. That team came out of nowhere. They're in a bye week now. They're not even the play-in. They're that good. They really jumped up and leapfrogged a bunch of teams just as the league was winding down and shutting down. But yeah, Philadelphia, I'm not saying are going to go all the way, but don't be shocked if Philadelphia really makes a name for themselves in this play-in round / playoffs, because I think Carter Hart is one of the best young goalies in the league. I think that team has great talent on the forward core and, of course, in the D core. I think the Flyers and their fans should be really excited because they finally have a stable goaltender of the future. And, who knows? Maybe they can make a little bit of a push here. But that's it. Scott, thank you so much for joining us. If you wanted to tell people where they can read your stuff, follow you, everything, here's your little bit of time.
Yeah, it's just The Athletic these days, and at Scott C. Wheeler on Twitter, and everything flows through there. So,
well, Scott, once again, it's been a pleasure. We wish you nothing but the best, and hopefully we'll speak soon. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Thank you. All right, that was Scott Wheeler of The Athletic. Thank you so much, Scott, for joining. That was a great conversation, and we really got into a bunch of different topics, and I hope you all really enjoyed it. So thank you so much for listening and watching. Speaking of that, listen to us on SoundCloud, Spotify, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, and of course here on YouTube at SENS Talk. Click that red button to make it great and subscribe to us. You can also follow us on all our social medias at SENS Talk Podcast. That's on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Of course, follow me personally on my Twitter account at SENSTalk_. Thank you all for watching. Next week, we might have a huge guest. We'll announce that very soon. But besides that, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Have a great week.